Happy 4th of July, everybody. We're super excited to be here. The whole church is getting to gather together through technology, and it's amazing that even during the midst of a pandemic, we're still getting to gather together through Facebook and even watch this a couple days after. And so it's awesome what technology is allowing us to do as a church. If you see behind me, we are at the Raleigh Capitol building. And so they make decisions. This is the seat of power. They make decisions that impact every single citizen in North Carolina. And today we're going to be looking at a passage that talks about really the seat of power and how we respond during times of difficulty. I want you to transport yourself with me during the time of 1 Peter. In 1 Peter, during this time, we have, let's say your family is there and it's in a big city. And Nero is making decisions at his seat of power that are impacting every citizen. Now Nero, and during that time, things weren't going so well. Nero had kind of set ablaze to half the city, which was a terrible idea. And not only that, but now the economy is starting to downturn and Rome is finding itself in just war after war after war. And the citizens are starting to feel a lot of pressure from it. And so Nero, to take some of that responsibility and some of that pressure off of himself, is starting to blame Christians for a lot of things. He's blaming Christians for the burning of half the city. He's blaming Christians for the economy downturning. He's blaming Christians that the war is still going on because, in his mind, because the Christians follow this Jesus, this other God, then the other gods in the Roman time are not happy with them. And so now Christians are getting blamed for a ton of different things, and it's coming from the top. And so that's starting to impact every citizen and even the businesses and your neighbors. And so if you had your family living in a city during that time, you would start to see a lot of different pressure and a lot of different stuff starting to happen. And just a few months ago, you would experience peace and you'd be doing okay. But now since Nero has started to blame you and your family for essentially just following Jesus and a lot of the bad things, your neighbors are starting to distance themselves a little bit. You're starting to see government officials follow you and hunt down other Christians. Not only that, but now this Christianity that started in the nation of Israel is starting to expand and go out through all the world, is now being watched by everyone. And so that's causing business owners to really find some difficulty there because now people aren't buying a lot of the same stuff they were. They're not worshiping the same gods that they were. And so now the local economies are starting to feel it. And so everywhere you go, whether you're going to get groceries, whether you're going just to connect and hang out with people, people are distancing themselves from you, and you're starting to see that Christians are being hunted. And so now you're going to church. You're not going to church on Sunday right in front of everybody. You're now going to the catacombs. And that is essentially a burial spot underground to avoid a lot of the persecution. So now your family's going to church at night, and you're starting to see a lot of your friends are disappearing. You're starting to see that the government is rounding up people. You're even hearing about church members being murdered just for their beliefs. And so in the midst of this turmoil, you make a decision to move your family. To move your family to a smaller city, and you leave in the middle of the night. You go on foot and travel miles and miles. You get there to a house you haven't seen before, and you start your life over, leaving all of your stuff behind, trying to escape the persecution that's been coming. You're there for a few months, you've built relationships, but now the same pressures and the same things you're facing are starting to rear its head again. And this is where the scene of 1 Peter is happening. The church is being attacked, and now people are saying, what do we do? How do I respond in these situations where my boss or the government is coming after me? My neighbors are distancing themselves from me. What do I do, and how do I look to Jesus in this time? And that is what 1 Peter is all about. It's what Peter is getting to. And so when we are jumping in, I want you to have that picture in your mind. And this is what 1 Peter 2:11 through 12 says. It says, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires, which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us." It's interesting there is he's saying that, hey, there's some sins that are waging war against you, that are coming against you. And so in our minds, we think of sins as these big bad things like killing people or lying or whatever is in your mind for your sins. And what Peter is coming along and saying, he's saying, hey, people are watching you And what's waging war against you is this desire and this anger that's coming up because people are starting to attack you. They're not only attacking you, they're attacking your family. Not only attacking your family, they're attacking your friends and the church. And so Peter's coming along and saying, hey, there's sins that are coming after you. You have to be careful because people are watching. And verse 12 ends and he's saying, look, you have the chance to impact people in such a way that they glorify God on the day he visits us. Essentially, they come to know Jesus. And here's what I want you to know today is that you have influence. It's said through research that even the most introverted person still impacts 10,000 people in their lifetime. The question for influence is not if you have it, it is what you are doing with your influence. What are you doing with your influence? And what Peter kind of paints the picture as is that you are either doing one of two things with your influence. You are either pulling people to Jesus or you're going to be pushing people away from Jesus. That's what Peter's saying. Right now, in the midst of this difficult time, Peter's saying that you have two ways to influence people. You're either going to be pulling them to Jesus or pushing them away. When I was a senior, my class, we got to go on a class trip and we decided to go to Orlando. And so our school took this janky old bus to Orlando. We were 2 hours out from the airport and the bus, like every youth trip, decides to break down. And so there's two leaders that stand up. Everybody's kind of freaking out because we got 2 hours to get to the airport and we're not going to miss our senior trip. And so all of this is just this major crisis that's happening. And so one leader stands up and he says, look, we've got a plan where everybody remain calm and we're still going to be able to go on our senior trip. Another one of our leaders stands up, freaks out and says, I knew we should have never gone on the airplane. I knew we should have never gone to Orlando and never should have taken this janky old bus here. And so this one leader starts influencing some of the students and the other leader starts influencing the students. And what we see is that deciding whatever students listen to one leader decided to remain calm and create a plan and get us there on time. The students that listened to the other leader, they influenced them in such a way that they weren't able to do much and they were freaking out, calling their moms, calling their dads, asking them to go ahead and plan on coming and get me. And so our influence impacts everyone around us. No matter if you're the most introverted person or if you have a ton of friends or very few friends, you are still influencing the people around you. This year has been really difficult. There's no doubt about it. We've each struggled, we've each worried, we've each tried to figure out what the next month is going to look like. And each time it seems like we're finally starting to get some kind of plan and starting to get some kind of momentum, something sets us back. We're reminded of the injustices that are very real and very much happening in the world. And so it seems like we've just been on this roller coaster. And now COVID-19 seems to be rearing its head again and states are starting to shut back down. And how do we navigate these waters? And I think in the midst of this time, Peter brings a really great message to us. And he's reminding us that we each have influence. And the question is, what are we doing with our influence? And this, I think, is largely dependent, and what Peter brings up is largely dependent on what's happening in our heart. And see, this is what Jesus says in Luke 6:45. He says, what you say flows from what is in your heart. And so when bad things happen to us, when we're under stress, when we're under pressure, how we respond is whatever we've been putting into our heart. And for us, Lena is our baby girl. She is turning 1 this month, and so we're super excited for that. And we've gotten into the fun world of purees, and we've seen that they make like really weird purees. So they've got like blueberry and spinach. Like, who puts those two things together? It's super disgusting. But we give it to her because we feel like it's a healthy thing to do. And so, look, when we give her this blueberry spinach puree, I expect blueberry spinach puree to come out. And if I was to squeeze it and something else was to come out, I would be freaking out. Because whatever is put in that pouch and whatever is labeled on that pouch is going to come out. In your life, whatever you're putting into your heart, you're going to be getting right now. This is a pressure time. This is a very stressful time. And so however we're reacting to this situation is revealing where our heart is. That's what Jesus is saying. What you say flows from what your heart. And the beautiful thing is, I know sometimes, like, if we're asking ourselves, like, what is coming out of our heart right now? How are we reacting? And if we're honest, sometimes we can say, man, I feel like I can bring a ton of people to Jesus. And the other time I can feel like, man, I might be pushing people away from Jesus. And what Jesus is reminding us of is that we can still decide what we're putting into our heart. Right now, if you are in a place where you feel like you're not reacting in a positive way, if you feel like you're reacting and pushing people away from Jesus, he says hope's not lost. right? Like we can still go to this source of life who is Jesus. But you have to start with the question of what are you putting into your heart right now? What are you putting into your heart right now? Because it's going to decide how you're reacting, and it's going to paint this picture of actually where we're going to be today in 1 Peter. So look at with me in verse 13. He says, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor or as the supreme authority, or to the governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone and love the family of believers. Fear God and honor the emperor. This is really crazy. The government, who is responsible for many people hating Christians at that time, for economies, they're blaming them for the economy and for the war and for the bad things that are happening. The government that's responsible for that, Peter is turning around, jumping right in, and he's saying, hey, uphold the government. That's a really hard statement to hear, because I bet that many Christians during that time are wanting to push back, to revolt, and fight for their justice. That it's not right that they're being punished for just believing in Jesus, for loving one another and actually making the world a better place. And yet that's where they find themselves. I want you to keep going, because this is where Peter continues this. He jumps right into it, right into the thick of their pain, and he's going to keep going. Look at verse 18. Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is a commendable thing before God. Look, I want to press pause just for a second. He's bringing up slavery. And now this slavery in the New Testament is very different than the one that was in American history. The slaves in the New Testament had certain rights, and many people would willingly go into slavery to pay off debts. Now, Peter is not saying that slavery is right. What Peter is doing is saying, hey, there's a system here. We're all within it right now. And it's not about trying to, maybe eventually trying to uphold it, but I know that many of you are facing real threats, and here's how you can react and respond in the midst of this. And so, what Peter is calling us to do is to do good. And even in the midst of extreme suffering, even in the midst of extreme unknown, in the midst of you being angry, in the midst of you being upset, in the midst of your faith being shaken, you still have a purpose and a plan. That God's impact and his heart for you is still there. And when you are in the midst of those difficulties, when you're in the midst of real life struggles, that you're still influencing those around you. We don't get to press pause. He's saying people are looking at you. And right now, your friends and your family are still looking to you, looking to see how you respond. Because if we're honest with the church, what's amazing is that during this time of persecution, when people are leaving the cities and people are truly dying for their faith, the government is taking people, taking Christians and throwing them in coliseums and slaughtering them for entertainment. And yet the church is growing. The church is growing in the midst of extreme persecution. And for some reason, people are looking at Christians and they're saying, even though they're dying, I want what they have. And it's because they're using their influence and they're responding in a way they've never seen before. In a way, instead of freaking out, instead of giving up, Christians were still meeting together, they were still loving other people, and they were still impacting and making a difference in the world. And yet, in the midst of that persecution, when people should be pushing away and saying, I don't want anything to do with this, they're jumping in and saying, I want it all the more. And so what is Peter calling us to do? COVID-19 stinks. It's costing people their life, costing livelihoods. And in this moment where we have this ability to respond in anger and be upset, there's also this really great opportunity for us to respond and do good, to make a difference. And how we do that is that Peter starts to bring us to Jesus. Look at this in 1 Peter 2:21-25. It says, to this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. And when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he trusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins and in his body on the cross so that we might die to sin and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but now you have been returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. Jesus knows your pain. He knows what it means to be under the tyranny and experience real life threats, real life pressure. The Roman government beat Jesus. And as he's being nailed to the cross, he doesn't look down and hurl threats at them. He says something that's mind-blowing. He asks God to forgive them. And for us, some of us have been hurt, maybe by our parents, maybe by our bosses, maybe by the government, maybe by whatever is going on in your life. And we really want to get even. We want to respond to get angry. And in this moment, we see that Jesus is entrusting himself to God. And when he entrusted himself to God, entrusted his situation to God, you see that he responds in a way that doesn't make sense. Instead of getting even, Jesus asks for forgiveness because he trusts God. He knows that God's plan is better than my plan. In your life, you're experiencing a lot. Your influence is still there and God still has a plan for you in this suffering. But there comes a point where we have to say that God's plan for me is better than my own plan. And Lord, I'm going to trust you. And whatever you're doing in my life and what you're calling me to in this moment is to do good. And so Peter is reminding us to guide our hearts to trust, to put into our hearts time with Jesus. And so that when pressure and when stress and when this weight hits us, we don't respond in trying to get even. We respond by trusting God and do good. Look at what he tells them in verses 15 and 20. So in 15, he's talking about the government. Verse 20, he's talking about masters. And catch what he says. It says, for it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Verse 20, but how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good, you endure it. This is commendable before God. In both times, he's saying, hey, the government and people are against you. And instead of giving into that, instead of responding how we naturally want to do, respond by doing good. Give mercy to those that need it. Show good faith to those in your neighborhood. Love your boss. Respond in kindness to your family. Do good and spread Jesus around you. And when we respond better by trusting the one who is better, we respond better by trusting the one who is better. In your life, you still have influence and you're impacting those around you. You can bring them to Jesus and show them what it looks like to have a changed life. Or when we respond negatively, we can tend to push people away from Jesus. Because instead of walking in the newness of life, we're allowing the sins to encroach in our heart. Today, that's what I'm encouraging you to do. To trust God and to respond by doing good. Be better by trusting the one who is better. If you have any questions and want to get to know this Jesus, please message us on Facebook Live. We would love to answer any questions you have and even meet with you through Zoom or in person, whichever one you're most comfortable with. But please don't hesitate to reach out. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for this time together. And God, you are doing amazing things. And Lord, you still have a plan for us in the midst of great suffering, in the midst of great difficulty, when there's a lot of stress. Lord, you haven't abandoned us. And God, you have a plan for us right now. Lord, help us to influence those around us and to trust you. And we ask these things in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you next week.